Hello and welcome to another Arsecast Extra, as always, with James from Gunnerblog. James, good morning to you.
Morning, Andrew. How you doing?
Not great. It's been a pretty bad weekend, hasn't it? Not one good football result this weekend.
Yeah, they were all pretty unkind, actually.
Yeah, and to compound the misery, on Saturday evening, after the game, and I'd done all my work and I'd had a drink, I decided I needed to comfort eat some yellow M&Ms.
They have to be yellow. Oh, you mean the packet, not every M&M inside.
Yeah, not just yellow. No. I don't have a sorter, just going through all the M&Ms and picking out the yellow ones. The yellow packet, the peanut M&Ms. So I was playing a bit of a video game and eating my M&Ms to make myself feel better and chipped a tooth. So that was brilliant.
You chipped a tooth on an M&M?
Yeah.
Wow.
I know.
That's a shame.
It is. Now I have to go to the dentist.
Oh, man. Does it hurt?
No.
Right.
Thankfully. That's the silver lining, I guess. But
it really sounds like something that would happen to me,
it
to be honest
does.
with you.
Well, I mean, if it were you, the M&M would somehow have got, stuck in your nostril and you would have had to be rushed to hospital where they would have had to amputate your foot for some reason.
Sure. Yeah. All my teeth just would have been replaced by M&Ms.
Peanut M&M teeth.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that, Andrew. What a weekend it's been for you.
What a weekend it's been for everybody. Nobody's had any fun this weekend, I think.
No. I was thinking about that this morning. I was kind of looking at the results and trying to find a silver lining, and I couldn't really.
No,
I must confess, it's not been a fun one. And we all missed the Premier League so much.
I know. Yeah, we were all just waiting for it to come out. Oh, not these fucking international breaks. What a pain in the arse. Can't wait for real football to be back. Can't wait for the Arsenal to be back. And then I was like, maybe could have waited a little longer.
I know, right? And it toyed with us as well. Like Spurs went behind, United went behind, I think Villa went behind, City, of course, it went to the very last. They went behind, and it went to the last second. So, fate was playing games with us, I think, all weekend.
Whoever did the thing that made the universe mad at us, just correct that, would you please, whoever you are out there? Sort it out.
You've got a day until the next Arsenal match.
Basically, they stood on the cracks in the pavement, didn't they? Or broke a mirror or whatever thing that gets you bad luck. Sort it out.
Yeah. Well, that's the nice thing, I guess, that the football agenda may move on very quickly.
That is true. We do have an opportunity to put the Bournemouth game behind us very quickly. I don't think the Premier League itch can be scratched, whatever happens tomorrow night, until obviously we play Liverpool next weekend, and that's a big game. But obviously, what happened at the Vitality Stadium was not great from an Arsenal perspective, for various reasons, primarily the result, but also the fact that we were reduced to 10 men again. We have the physical demands of playing for well over an hour with 10 men, a man light. It makes it much more difficult to win games. And I think there were, perhaps some questions to be asked about our performance, even when we did have 11 men. So where to start? Team lineup, I guess. Ben White was back. Bukayo Saka not in the squad at all. Obviously, we're waiting to hear if there's anything to worry about there, because Mikel Arteta said before the game that he was quite close and could potentially have played. Was it just a case that with the schedule that's on the horizon, with some very difficult away games coming up, they decided not to risk him in this one? So Raheem Sterling came in, Martinelli was on the bench, Kai Havertz was fit, and there was a first start for Mikel Merino. What did you make of the team?
I mean, listen, no Saka or Martin Odegaard. I think it's since 2021.
Really?
First time that we've been without those two. August 2021, when we played Brentford on the Friday night away from home. We hadn't yet signed Odegaard. And that was the last time we started a game without either Odegaard.
That's mad.
Yeah.
That is mad.
It is mad. And I think it's probably an important consideration in analysing the game and our performance and the result. I mean, those two are so important to us. And, I think I got a message on my work Slack channel from Art saying, I've just seen the players get off the bus and Bukayo Saka wasn't there. And my heart did slightly sink because, he's just been so important to us.
Was the crying emoji at the end of Art's message, or?
There were 5 crying emojis, and then the heartbroken emoji.
Okay, that's good.
And then a skull emoji, consensusly. It's a crazy stat. Brentford 2021, and if you include only games where Odegaard was actually at the club, you're looking at February 2021. Leicester away.
Right.
He was on loan at that time, and we were without one of them. So we are absolutely accustomed to having those. At least one of those players available.
So do you think that played a part in Mikel Arteta's team selection, in that obviously Raheem Sterling coming in for Bukayo Saka is vastly experienced, has played a lot on the right-hand side. I'm not saying it's a like for like by any means, but certainly a fairly obvious change to make. But it's the makeup of that midfield trio, perhaps, where he figured away from home, first game back after the international break, Partey, Rice, Merino, was certainly more functional than creative,
Yeah. It's hard to know, obviously hindsight is 2020. I did, at the time, I wasn't sure how I felt about that. I mean, I did think in some respects this team, it felt like kind of as far as Arteta has gone in his kind of pursuit of physical dominance. Like when you look through the spine and it was Gabriel and Saliba at centre-half, Partey and Rice, at the base of midfield, and then Merino and Havertz in more attacking roles maybe. I mean, that's as big and as strong as Arsenal have probably ever looked. I don't know if I quite can remember an Arsenal team with that kind of physical presence, certainly through the centre of the pitch. But I would concur with what you've said, that it lacked maybe a little bit of imagination or creativity. I don't wish to stereotype those players and sort of suggest, that they're kind of, I don't know,
incapable,
purely physical.
Yeah, sure.
But I remember sort of in the first 5 minutes of the game, we were in our sort of 4-4-2 out of possession shape, and it's sort of Merino and Havertz leading the line and Rice and Partey behind. And I did kind of feel like we are missing something there in terms of the creative dimension. I know we had Trossard and Sterling on the pitch, but in the central areas in particular, is that just a consequence of losing Odegaard and losing Saka, or could Arteta have been a bit more brave maybe and given a chance to Nwaneri?
Sure.
I don't know. And as I say, hindsight's 2020, but it seemed to me to be an 11 that was about physical dominance and control and competing, maybe more so than the creative dimension. What did you think?
Yeah, I was curious to see where Merino would play and what his role would be, and he seemed to be towards the right side of central midfield. I did think early on maybe the pace of the game was a little hectic for him. I know not a great deal happened, but he looked to me like a guy who's sort of still getting up to speed, which I think is entirely fair, right? Because, this was his first start for Arsenal, and he's obviously had some injury problems. So I'm not being critical of that, but I did notice it. I think what's really difficult today is trying to judge the 11 versus 11 performance, because it was only like 1/3 of the game, right? Yeah. And I think we have to take into account that, okay, these three haven't started in midfield before. It is just after an international break. It's not uncommon for a team to come back after the break and take a little bit of time to get going, right? It might take you 45 minutes before you find your rhythm in a game. So it's really difficult to say whether that was a good selection, bad selection, or something else, or something in between, right? Because it can just take you a bit of time. Even in a normal game, you can have like a first half that's pretty indifferent before, you find your gear or you find your rhythm in the second half. So it is really, I think it's too difficult to say that 11 versus 11 this would not have worked over the course of 90 minutes. I think what we can say is that 11 versus 11, we didn't do an awful lot. And neither did Bournemouth, to be fair. I think both teams, don't want to say necessarily cancelled each other out, but it was a really slow pitch because they'd watered it very heavily. Did you see the way the when the ball was being passed along the pitch, the water was like spraying up in the air? I think that was very deliberate. I think it was an issue for both sides, to be honest. I think the pace of the game was quite slow. Bournemouth were set up very well. Technically, their press was very good when we had possession. They'd obviously done their homework on Arsenal, the way we like to play. So there was this sort of like half an hour of not very much happening from either side. We certainly didn't look like we were going to cause them too many problems, but it was still only half an hour, and games can change very quickly. So it's really tough to make a definitive decision on whether that starting 11 would have worked or would not have worked. But like you, I think it did lack something. On paper, certainly it lacked something, and we'll obviously come to what happened afterwards and the second half.
I mean, the only thing I would sort of add to that is I think you make a good point about it coming after the internationals and it can take time to get going. But I wonder if, given that, maybe there was more we could have done with the selection to kind of give us a bit of continuity from what we have been doing in previous games. The kind of Havertz and Trossard in central areas, that partnership has actually worked really quite well. And I wonder if maybe there was an iteration of this team that allowed us some continuity there and carrying that momentum through. I'm not saying it would have worked, but I think there was a case to carry on with that.
Sure.
I think Havertz has actually done really well, sort of, playing from a little bit deeper and combining with Trossard. But I think what Marino and Havertz gave us was kind of a clear target for longer balls. And when you think about Bournemouth's game, so much of it is about the high press, right? That's incredibly important to their style of play. And they were good, and they are really good at it. And I think the idea was probably to kind of draw them in and then play sort of mid-range passes into Havertz and Marino and go from there with Martinelli and Sterling and others running off them. Trossard and Sterling running off them. But it was interesting, wasn't it? I mean, one sort of aspect of the game, Arsenal have been so brilliant and David Raya has been so brilliant in terms of, knocking the ball around at the back. And I did think they were still pretty composed in this game and they stuck out the game plan. But there were one or two sticky moments, right? Which maybe against Bournemouth is something you have to accept is going to happen. They are so focused on winning the ball high up the pitch. Yeah,
I think Raya gave it away once, didn't he? There was a miss kick from him. So I think there were elements of our performance, obviously, that were below par. There were mistakes pretty much all the way through. Nevertheless, as I said, we got to about half an hour and not much had really happened at either end. I don't think either keeper had to make a save. And then we have this moment when Trossard, I don't quite understand what he's trying to do here. No. I don't know if he's expecting the defence to be quite as high up. Might just be trying to play it back to Gabriel or something. I don't really know what he's doing. But it gave Evan Nielsen the opportunity to take the ball and go through on goal. But William Saliba made a foul. He made a foul. The player went down, and then we have this situation where the referee gave a yellow card and then was told by VAR to go and look at it, had a look at it, decided it was denial of a goal-scoring opportunity and changed the yellow card to a red card. So how do you feel about the way that went down?
I think it's a really interesting one because I think it's one of the more subjective calls in football. So the wording of the law is apparently denying a goal or an obvious goal-scoring opportunity to an opponent whose overall movement is towards the offender's goal by an offence punishable by a free kick is the wording for a red card. But it adds, the following must be considered: distance between the offence and the goal, general direction of the play, likelihood of keeping or gaining control of the ball, and the location and number of defenders. And I think, by and large, those sort of additional factors are kind of in Arsenal's favour in this situation. You know, it is a big distance between the offence and the goal. The likelihood of keeping or gaining control of the ball, it's hard to discern. The location and number of defenders, arguably you've got Ben White covering. So I think basically where I'm at with it is that I wouldn't have had that many arguments if the referee had shown a red card. I think it's sort of highly debatable that having given a yellow, that could be deemed a clear and obvious error that needed to be overturned.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think I agree with you in that if it had been a straight red, I don't think it would have been overturned if VAR had looked at it. And of course, I don't think there was any chance if the referee had given a straight red that the Liverpool fan on VAR would have told the referee to have a look at it anyway. But I'm sort of with you in that when I look at it and I try and reverse it and, you know, maybe apply my penalty judgment theory to this. Like, if that's Gabriel Martinelli going through on goal, do I want the Bournemouth player sent off for that? Do I think he should be sent off for that?
I think you probably would.
I think I probably would. And here's where, you know, I think one of the best things about William Saliba is his decision making. Right? He very, very rarely makes the wrong decision. And I think in this instance, one of the few times I can remember he made the wrong decision, where I think, A, he's quick enough to chase down Evan Nielsen. I think we've seen that before, right? We've seen him chase players down and make a tackle before. He's got incredible pace. I think if Evan Nielsen, even if he gets through, has Saliba thundering in behind him, there's every chance that, you know, this clear goal scoring opportunity comes to nothing. And even if he does score, it's 1-0 with an hour plus to play, and we've got plenty of time to turn it around. And unfortunately, Saliba, in making that foul that a forward is always going to make the most of, he gave the officials a decision to make. And
he panics, I think. And to be fair, I've got a lot of sympathy with Saliba, because if football was a kind of just game, it would be Leandro Trossard who was sent off for that goal. Because Saliba's position isn't bad. You know, he's in line with Gabriel. He's playing Ben White. He's playing Evan Nielsen offside. And you can't really anticipate a guy playing a 30-yard through ball back towards their own goal.
No,
you know?
No.
And I think he panics in that moment. Maybe he sees as well that Raya is retreating rather than coming forward. Again, if Bournemouth were in possession, I think Raya would be on his toes, on the edge of the box, ready to come out and clean it up. But he's not anticipating what Trossard does either. Honestly, when they get back in that dressing room, you know, I'm sure Saliba put his hand up, but Trossard really should be putting his hand up and saying that is on me.
Agree, yeah. It's a really bad, it's too bad. Well, one bad mistake, because I don't think Trossard he's sort of hitting that blind, if you like. You know, I don't know what he's doing. I don't know what is in his head at that moment in time. And Saliba's mistake is simply a reaction, right? A sort of in the moment, instantaneous reaction to the idea that this guy is going to run beyond him. And I think if you can even think that clearly in that moment, he's probably thinking, I'm on the halfway line here. It's just about inside the half. There's no way that this is going to be considered a clear goal scoring opportunity. So maybe he weighed up all those factors. I think it was probably a bit more instinctual than that. But the consequence of that was it gave the referee a decision to make, and it allowed VAR to get involved, even though we've been told the threshold for VAR is, you know, supposed to be higher and higher and higher, and that the referee's decision, the on-field decision of the referee, I don't think too many people would have gone crazy if that was just a yellow card for William Saliba. I don't think it would be a talking point this weekend. I don't think the Bournemouth fans would be particularly up in arms, regardless of how this game played out. You know, the idea that whatever happened in this game for them would have hinged on Saliba being sent off or not. So I think if it had just been a yellow card, I think it would have been fine. The unfortunate thing, as I said, is that Saliba's split-second decision to pull the guy back gave them the opportunity to give yet another red card to Arsenal.
Well, I think as well, the scale of punishment for an offence like that is quite dramatic.
It's hard, isn't it? I was thinking about that this weekend, that like the 3 red cards we've had 3 red cards in 8 games. And I don't think an Arsenal player has made a bad foul or a really cynical foul or a dangerous bit of play or anything like that. It's vexatious in the extreme to experience 3 red cards for so little. Like, not all 3 of them together barely add up to a fucking yellow card.
Well, Andrew, it's not just the games that they're sent off in. It's the suspension in the following game.
Of course.
And a massive game in Arsenal's case against Liverpool next weekend, in which we'll be without William Saliba. Did you see there was a
Rice for the derby, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Did you see there was a similar incident in the Liverpool-Chelsea game?
Yeah.
That's what I mean about it being highly subjective. And I think if it had just been given as a yellow, I honestly think people probably would have accepted it. It might have got a bit of attention, but not a great deal. My question would be, what was the VAR showing the referee in that replay that was something he hadn't seen in real time? Like, for me, the referee's got a view of that incident. He assesses it. He makes an on-field decision for a yellow card. When he went over and watched it, I'll be fascinated to find out what were they saying in his ear that was different to what he'd already refereed. You know what I mean?
Whatever Howard Webb was texting them to say, clearly.
Yeah, from his vantage point. I mean, yeah, it is a slightly curious area because I think it is very grey and there's a lot of subjectivity involved. No referee and no pundit and no fan can accurately assess what's going to happen from that moment where Evan Nielsen receives possession of the ball 40 yards from goal.
Yeah.
So it's all a guessing game, and you have to make your assessment. I just don't. I find it a bit of a head scratcher that the referee had all the tools at his disposal to make that assessment, made it, and then was advised to change it.
Yeah. Well,
so there you go.
Your guess is as good as mine when it comes to that. I think, what we have to discuss now is how Arsenal reacted and how Arsenal responded. Mm-hmm. And Mikel Arteta's response to this was to take off Raheem Sterling, to put Jakub Kiwior on at centre-half. And this is, I think there's an interesting discussion here because we talked about this a little, didn't we, when we went down to 10 men against Brighton, and we talked about it in a bit more depth when we went down to 10 men against Manchester City, and it's how Arsenal play when they're down to 10 men. And I think in the case of the City game, it wasn't much fun to watch by any means, but I understood the approach, given the quality of Manchester City and given the circumstances and given that we had a lead to protect, right? Mm. In this instance, I was not a great fan of the substitution. And that's not really a knock on Kiwior, and I know he made a big mistake. But I do wonder if, given it was half an hour into the game, could we have reorganised a little bit differently in that you've got Declan Rice, who has played at centre-half in his career more than once. He's got plenty of games at centre-half for West Ham. I think he's even got games at centre-half for England and Ireland. So I wonder if, with 15 minutes of that first half to go, you give yourself the opportunity to think about it a bit more. Put Rice back at centre-half alongside Gabriel. You've got a natural left-right pivot with Partey and Marino in central midfield. You keep your wide players on. You've got Havertz as your outlet. And that way, you've kept your wide players on, and you don't have to make a change and reshuffle and move people and play people necessarily out of position, which I think, Kiwior as a left-footed player as the right-sided centre-half is just a little bit out of position for me. Mm-hmm. So what did you make of his decision to make that change? Do you think maybe it said something about what he thinks of Raheem Sterling's ability to do what he needs a player to do when we're down to 10 men? Or was it simply a case of, right, I've got to get another defender on here because we've lost a defender? What do you think?
Yeah, it'd been a sort of interesting half hour from Sterling because I feel like he's sort of a bit of a magic 8-ball of a player. You give him a shake and you never quite know what's going to come out of it. But he does get in dangerous positions. So even in that first half hour, there were moments where he got to the byline or he got on the ball inside the penalty area, and the execution wasn't quite there. But in a funny sort of way, he also looked the man most likely. I think that's kind of who he is really at this point in his career. And taking him off definitely reduced our threat. I suppose the tricky thing about these sending off is that they come in different game states, right? They require totally different responses. And this was at a point in the game where it was still sort of there to be won. We had to have a kind of front-footedness in the way that we played. So, I think the option you propose is a good one. You could also have put Ben White in at right centre-half and put Thomas Partey in at right back. There are other things you could have done that I think would have given us more structure, more shape, more cohesion, and maybe kept a bit more threat on the field. I wonder as well, was the absence of Odegaard and Saka kind of already weighing quite heavily in Arteta's mind? Was he already looking at this as a tough game to win that became tougher at 10 men? And his thought was maybe more on protection than on winning it. I don't know, but I wonder if he'll reflect on that decision differently this morning. Yeah,
maybe so. I mean, I think the thing is, apart from maybe one chance for Semenyo early in the second half, there wasn't a great deal of threat from Bournemouth. No. Like, it wasn't that we were under the cosh. We weren't being peppered with shots. Raya wasn't having to make save after save. There are a couple of blocks and a couple of, corners and set pieces that we had to deal with, but nothing really that tested us too much, And maybe in part that's because he brought Kiwior on and we were defensively solid. But I just think the scope was there maybe for us to be a little more front-footed with the players we already had on the pitch. Would it have made a huge difference? I don't know. I just think, sacrificing an attacking player for a defender, it does nullify you a little bit, doesn't it? When you're down to 10 men, obviously being down to 10 men is a big disadvantage. But if in going down to 10 men, you also lose one of your attacking threats, then it does make it much more difficult for you to win the game. So, hindsight 2020, as you said a bit earlier on, but I do think he could have reorganised with the players he had on the pitch, and maybe in that context we could have posed a bit more threat to Bournemouth, not just in the second half, but also in what remained of the first half.
Yeah, I think that's possible. And, I know people were calling for more attack-minded substitutions earlier in the game. 64 minutes we saw Martinelli come on for Trossard, but then it was, into the last 10 minutes of the game before we saw either Gabriel Jesus or Ethan Nwaneri. So maybe, that's another area we could have looked at to try and give us a bit more go forward. It's difficult though, it is difficult to look past the sending off as as the pivotal moment of the game. Away from home in the Premier League, down to 10 men against a very physical, energetic, organised Bournemouth side. You have to be realistic as well about what we're capable of in that set scenario. And Arteta kind of said that in his post-match press conference. He said, it's very difficult to analyse when you're playing 2/3 of a game with 10 men.
I don't disagree with that at all. Of course it is. But I think what you can analyse is what you do with 10 men.
Yeah.
Or how you try and play with 10 men. Now, look, I think we had a chance. We had a really, really good chance. I mean, this was a game that Arsenal lost because of mistakes. Bournemouth made a big mistake and we didn't punish them the way we should have. I think it was Kepa played the ball into midfield. Mikel Marino, who anticipated, got there first, intercepted it, and played a pass into Martinelli, who's on the run. He's a clear side of goal. People talking a lot about how it was easy for the goalkeeper, how he sort of telegraphed the kind of finish that Martinelli was going to apply in that case. Where do you stand on this one being a bad miss versus a good save?
In the moment, my reaction was that he should score. I'm going to watch it again now and see if I if that's still how I feel. It is a good save, I think. So yeah, Marino does really well, sets Martinelli up. I still think I expect him to do a bit better there, I have to say.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think it's one of those that in a game like this, if you how do I put this?
It's a big moment.
It's a big moment, and I don't want to necessarily say, because I saw a lot of nonsense this weekend about how, Arsenal's title credentials can be assessed by going down to 10 men against Bournemouth or missing a chance like that. Like, this idea that you can only be champions if you take chances like that in games like this. I don't really buy into that, but it is such a big moment. And it is an opportunity for Arsenal to go in front and then continue to do what they had been doing throughout this game, which was basically to frustrate Bournemouth, who had 11 men. And I think if we have a 1-goal advantage, all of a sudden it would become even more difficult for Bournemouth, because I think the defensive focus would have been upped, or the defensive intensity would probably have been upped. We would have said, right, come on, try and break us down, like we did to Manchester City, who could barely do it until like the last minute of the game, last second of the game.
And Bournemouth ain't Man City. Yeah.
No, they're not. But I do think there is something in that moment where it would have put the game on a completely different trajectory. I think we probably would have gone on to win that game if Martinelli scores there. And what sort of compounds the error, I don't know if you call it an error, but what compounds the miss is the fact that 60 seconds later, Bournemouth had the ball in the back of the net.
Yeah. I mean, I know what you mean about kind of, it doesn't say much about our title credentials, but I do think that maybe like if this game had been... You just feel like you're playing for a moment like that, aren't you? If you're away from home, 10 men, and you've got a relatively defensive setup, that is the precise moment you are waiting for. And you kind of...
You've got to take it, yeah.
You've got to take it when it comes. I know that, statistically, I think I saw Scott saying he had it as a kind of 1 in 4 chance of scoring. But if you want to be winning this game, it's an opportunity you absolutely have to take. Martinelli's been on the pitch, I think, less than 5 minutes. Maybe that's a factor. If I wanted to be fair to him, maybe he's not quite found his flow and his rhythm in the game. When you watch the chance again, it feels like Kepa stands up all right, but there's you could just sweep the ball in at his near post potentially if you have that awareness and that bit of composure. So yeah, and I think obviously you have that moment at one end, and then a few minutes later you find yourself behind. It's a big swing.
Yeah.
And this was listen, we've scored a lot of goals off set pieces this season. This was a very well executed one, I think, from Bournemouth. Yeah,
I did wonder if this was a routine that maybe they had worked on in the context of a game where you're playing against 10 men. I think when you look at it, and there was an angle from behind, they were analysing it on Sky, and when you looked at the setup of the players, I think just maybe we were a little too deep.
Yeah, he's very free on the edge of the box. Yeah, scores eventually.
We weren't short of numbers in there, because Bournemouth had kept a couple of men back. So we weren't necessarily short of numbers. It was just being aware of the danger. And to be fair to Bournemouth, they executed it very well. It's a nicely worked routine. It's a very good finish, and it's 1-0 to them. This is where I would have liked to have seen Mikel Arteta just, I don't want to say be a bit braver or whatever, but react more quickly.
Go for it a bit more. Yeah.
Go for it a bit more. I think by the time Ethan Nwaneri and Gabriel Jesus came on the pitch, it was too late, obviously, because it was 2-0. And I mean, we might as well just talk about it very quickly. It's an underhit back pass from Kivior. Raya comes out. I think it's one of those where it's not really a foul by the goalkeeper. Do you think?
What, this for the penalty?
Yeah. I don't think it's really a foul, but it's one of those that always gets given because he comes out, he has a little dive, and the forward makes contact. I don't think that's the big issue anyway. I don't.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I suppose I have that feeling of like that we'd already made our error.
Yeah, exactly. I mean? Yeah. I mean, the error was the back pass from Kiwior. It was, poor. Again, maybe the pitch, but, that's not to make any excuse for Kiwior. He should be better.
Left-footedness is an excuse in that situation. You know what I mean? Because he's facing his own goal. The ball's kind of on his left foot. I think it maybe takes a little bounce up before he hits it, but yeah. And Raya, I'm watching that again now. Let's have a look. I mean, Raya sort of doesn't really... He kind of throws himself down and the player just hangs his legs out, doesn't he?
Yeah, exactly.
He buys the foul, I think, would be how I would word it.
But they're nearly always given as a penalty.
They are, and every player's doing it, and certainly our players are doing it as well. So it's one of those, and the game is...
it's done.
Up.
It's done at that point.
Yeah.
So just sort of coming back to, I mean, maybe it was something Arteta was planning on doing. I mean, there wasn't long between the penalty and the first goal. Let me just look at the timing here. So they scored in the 70th minute and the penalty is awarded in the 77th minute. So maybe it was something he was planning. I still think there's scope for him to say, right, it's 1-0. I've got to do something different immediately. If we want to get anything out of this game, and it's probably not going to be a win, it's probably going to be a point if we can get anything at all from this game, I have to react quickly. And I don't think he reacted quickly enough. I would have liked to have seen Nwaneri on for Marino as soon as that goal went in. And I think there was a case to bring Gabriel Jesus on as well. Just wasn't quite sure how you were going to do that. But I think he needed to do something more quickly than he did. Obviously, he can't legislate for Kiwior making that mistake, but still, I think it's again in the post game analysis that they have internally, I do wonder if that might be something that is in their conversation. Like, can we react more quickly to setbacks in games and change the dynamic? Because I think what we saw when Nwaneri came on was that he was capable of doing that, as he did against Leicester when he came on when we were chasing a game. I think you can make a case that for both of those substitute appearances, which are very impressive, he was on too late in the context of the games and the way they were playing out.
Definitely. And I think over the last few weeks, I think he's at the point where you can make a pretty good case from starting games as well. I know some may say that's too soon, but... No. I think in the absence of Odegaard and now Saka as well, the ability he has to unlock things in the final third is actually needed. It's
not even the unlocking things in the final third. I mean, I think the most eye-catching moment he had was Bournemouth had a corner or a free kick and it was clear to the edge of the box. And he picked up the ball and Bournemouth players were closing him down. He took it across the box, drove with the ball a little bit and then played this unbelievably precise pass to Gabriel Martinelli to set him free down the left-hand side. Now, nothing came of it, but it's that kind of thing that can get you going. If you are chasing a game, if you are down to 10 men, you need the ability to sort of bypass the opposition in a way, and he's capable of doing that both with his running and with his passing, not just in the opposition half, but in our half too.
That's it, and I think it's a question of his quality and his attributes that make him necessary. I know that we're fans and we get excited about young players, particularly homegrown academy players, and we want to see them given opportunities and minutes. So I'm really trying to temper myself here and sort of check myself and be like, am I being just an overexcited supporter? And I really don't think that's true. I really think when I look at the collection of midfielders that we currently have available, he brings a necessary balance to that group. Yeah. And that Marino, Partey, Rice, Jorginho, all these players have qualities, but they're qualities that are kind of a type, you know, and he is a different type, and a type that we are missing right now with our captain absent. So I think balance is key. You know, that was one of Mikel Arteta's big lessons, really, in kind of, what was it, that winter of 2020, that, you know, sometimes you go with seniority and you lean into the experience, but actually what's more important is that you have a balance of attributes across that team.
Yeah.
And I'm not comparing our state or our performances now to
No,
that
I know
time.
what you mean. I know exactly what you mean, yeah.
But, you know, it's not... Nwaneri's youth, I would say, is kind of course, it's relevant to the debate, but I think it's actually of secondary importance compared to what the team needs. I think he is the guy that we have right now who can provide that.
Yeah. He is like the perfect example of the if you're good enough, you're old enough adage, for me anyway.
Yeah,
you know?
or the, you know, the reality, if you're good enough, you're old enough, yes. But really what creates the opportunity for most players' breakthrough? Usually some sort of
necessity,
injury issue.
Yeah, or like a requirement for the team.
Exactly, yeah. You know, like, we need a left back. Bukayo Saka can play left back. He gets his chance. You know, we don't have a number 10. Emile Smith-Rowe gets his opportunity. And right now we find ourselves in this position where we've got a bunch of these sort of physically imposing, powerful midfielders, but not necessarily those who you deem more creative. And guess what? He's the next in line.
Yeah.
This is how it happens. And I think we're almost in the place where that is now the next step. It seems sort of the timing is tricky, right? Because what are our next two games? A Champions League match and then top of the table Liverpool on Sunday. But I think there's a very decent chance that we see Nwaneri maybe on Tuesday night.
Well, I was going to ask you, we probably had a question about this, and I haven't really looked at the questions in full depth yet, but I wrote about it this morning on the blog. I think tomorrow night is a perfect opportunity to start Ethan Nwaneri. I think it's a low-risk, high-reward decision for Arteta, you know? Because what we're seeing from this guy in like 10, 15-minute cameos is so exciting that you can't help but think, what's it going to be like over the course of 90 minutes? Like, he did start one game this season, let's not forget, and scored 2 goals against Bolton, admittedly, in the EFL Cup. Not the trickiest opposition, but you know, I don't think Shakhtar Donetsk, with all due respect, are going to be the most difficult opposition we face in the Champions League this season. So I think as an opportunity for Nwaneri to bring something to the team, to take another little step forward in his own development, right? You know, he started an EFL Cup game. He hasn't started a Premier League game yet, but he's got to be on course pretty soon to do that. So starting a Champions League game at home gives him that opportunity to take another little step, to develop, to believe, to grow his confidence. And, you know, if he plays well, it's brilliant for the team and for him and for us, right? And even if he doesn't play particularly well, he's still got that experience. And maybe it's a case of, okay, we're assessing how ready he is, and this is how he performed on a night like this. Okay, these are the things we need to work on, but it gives you a sort of broader picture of the player and what he's capable of and how ready he is for all of this. I mean, I would have no doubt or no worry whatsoever, not a single worry, that if we started Ethan Nwaneri tomorrow night, we would have a problem. I think we would benefit from him starting for all kinds of reasons. And like I said, even if he doesn't play out of his skin, the experience he gets from a night like that at home, at the Emirates, on a night where I think we do need to respond and we do need to show something a little bit more from this team than we've seen maybe throughout the season. And again, I understand why, because we've had 3 games from our 8 in the Premier League where we've been down to 10 men for not just like 10 minutes. Yesterday or on Saturday, it was over an hour. Against Manchester City, it was over an hour, or nearly an hour because of all the injury time they played. Against Brighton, it was the best part of 45 minutes. So for like significant periods of games, we have been, under strength, and it's really, really difficult. But I think tomorrow night, let's have a go. and let's really just give this kid a run and see what he's capable of. And his time on the pitch, I think, is going to be in some way connected to Martin Odegaard anyway, that when Odegaard comes back, maybe there isn't quite as much clamour. But while he's not there, come on, what have we got to lose by starting him tomorrow night?
Totally with you. And I would like to see him play maybe in a midfield with Rice and Marino, maybe something like that. I think that would give him a great platform and would sort of lend another dimension to the midfield construction. Give Thomas Partey a rest as well, potentially before he plays against Liverpool at the weekend. I hope we see that, and I think it is the obvious sort of next step for us and for him. And however he does, I think there's a chance he won't start against Liverpool on Sunday just because that's such a big game. But I think this is a great opportunity for him to show what he can do. And every time he's had that opportunity this season, he's grasped it. And at some point, you have to reward that.
So just to sort of sum up on part one, how do you try and compartmentalize this? This, I think Arteta said after the game, we can't feel sorry for ourselves. We made the mistakes. We've got to own the defeat. Is it one of those where, we just have to sort of say, okay, wasn't our day, bad day at the office, let's respond and let's see where we can go from here? Or do you have some concerns that it speaks to wider issues about the team? Again, though, I can't escape the fact that we just play for too many games or for too long with 10 men. To what extent are we in control of that, do you think?
Well, it's tricky, isn't it? Because I look at our sendings off this season and I think of them all. Well, they're quite subjective calls. They're quite tight calls. As you said, they're not due to some horrific, two-footed lunge that we're putting in on other teams. But then you look at the stats around Arsenal and sendings off. I mean, they are pretty striking, aren't they, since Mikel Arteta took charge? I think is it 18 red cards? Next Premier League team along has got 13. For whatever reason it's happening, one thing is certain: we can't keep doing this.
No,
we cannot keep doing this. And actually, one of the big changes last season was that our disciplinary record did kind of improve. We reached a kind of nadir, I think, in the sort of David Luiz era. Do you remember?
Yes,
where he seemed to be sent off pretty much every other game. And then it was Luiz and Xhaka, basically, who were absolutely integral parts of that team, but also liable to be sent off at any possible time. Xhaka improved in that regard. Luiz moved on, and Arsenal got a lot better. But this has been a torrid start to the season in terms of going down to 10 men. And it's simply not sustainable.
No.
I mean, you absolutely cannot win the league playing this percentage of minutes down a man. I don't quite know how to apportion blame for it, if I'm honest, because I think we've been quite unlucky.
Yeah, I mean, we've had 2 players sent off for something that no other player has been sent off for this season and probably won't be sent off for this season. And we've had a player sent off for something...
First time in his career.
For a foul that wasn't a red card in another Premier League game this weekend.
Yeah, and like I say, it's kind of a freak incident, really, in terms of Trossard's pass and what it does to us. So I'm sort of philosophical about it. But I do know it's been really costly. I look at the home game against Brighton.
Yeah.
I look at this game, 3 points dropped on a weekend where City get a 95th minute winner. It hurts. And it will hurt us. It has already hurt us. So, yeah, I do feel quite sort of rueful about that. But I'm cognizant at the same time that if we can rally and we can beat Liverpool next weekend, the picture will look very different.
It certainly will. I'm sort of with you. I'm hopeful that it's just kind of a run of bad luck more than anything else. But like we were saying, if this was a really hard, aggressive Arsenal team that were being punished for going over the top with physical challenges, you could see an easy solution to those red cards, right? Tackle better, don't give the referee those decisions to make. And in all 3 red cards we've had this season, I think they've been they've just been kind of freaky. So I'm hopeful that it's just a bad run and things will pick up. But yeah, we'll hope, obviously, that we can do the business against Liverpool. There is a game, of course, tomorrow night that we can talk about maybe after the break, because we'll do that here. We'll take a little break, come back with your questions and more in part 2 right after this. Welcome back to the Arsecast Extra. This is part 2 of the show where we answer questions that you sent to us on Threads and on the Arseblog Discord chat server, which you get access to if you are an Arseblog member on Patreon. I enjoyed this one from Emmanuel Eboué. That's his Halloween name on Discord.
Nice. Not
so much a question as a request for Gunnerblog to pass on a message to Mikel Arteta. Got enough red cards.
I'd rather not. I don't know how I'd take that.
I don't think that would go down particularly well.
Fortunately, I'm not there. He's doing his press conference, I think.
It was supposed to start at 10 o'clock, I thought, but I didn't see any updates from it yet. So we've no team news or anything about tomorrow night's game, which we might talk about in a bit. But, we had so many questions, James, about refereeing and officiating and the way people are feeling about football and how it's affecting their enjoyment of the game. Just a couple from the Discord. AFC Met, and I know you'll probably agree with this. He said, do you find talking about referees, PGMOL, VAR very exhausting? Why are referees the main event and not the players and the tactics? And of course, I say this and ask you this, knowing we're going to now talk about them. That's just a catch-22 of this, I guess. Wise Marklar, what are your thoughts on every game of football now seemingly hinging or being heavily influenced by the officials? It's all the pundits and the media seem to talk about. TNT Sports even promote their app by saying you can review every VAR decision and draw your own conclusions. Is that what football is about now? And of course, there's like Ref Watches and VAR Watch and fucking Dermot Gallagher, and like every single referee's decision is scrutinized. But I do understand why people are beginning to feel that the referees and the officiating and their decisions are somehow becoming more of the main event. Like, even to the point when the Saliba red card was issued, they cut to Howard Webb in the stand. Like, why do we need to see Howard Webb? Why do we need to see Howard Webb on his phone? Why do we need to see Howard Webb on his phone with an earpiece in? Which, the explanation on Sky was, he's listening to the VAR feed, which makes a lot of sense. But also there's the whole, we didn't burn him bit, where they're trying really hard to just make it clear that, well, no, nothing untoward is going on here. There's a VAR check going on and we see Howard Webb with an earpiece on his phone. I mean, that feels very deliberate and also quite unnecessary.
It does. I think that a lot of this is kind of, I think the media have to take some responsibility, because referees are always going to have massive influence over results in football. And the reason for that is it is a low-scoring sport in which the referee has the capacity to make decisions that can have a huge swing impact. Like if you give a penalty as a referee, that in this sport, that can be the only goal of the game.
Yeah.
If you send off a man and make it 11v10, that can be the defining moment of a match. And so I think a degree of focus on them and them having an influence over results is unavoidable. I really do think that. But I also believe that what we're witnessing is kind of, we've seen the explosion of coverage around football. Every facet of football is now covered to the nth degree.
Sure.
And I think in the referees and VAR, I think television have found a kind of new plot line that they can introduce to kind of the televisual soap opera that's playing out in front of us.
Yeah,
it's a very rich vein for them to explore, because what does it constitute? Well, countless replays and subjective analysis of moments in games. Therefore, you're always going to generate debate, and there's always going to be people on both sides of a decision. So it must be incredibly fertile in terms of generating views and engagement. Because it's kind of inherently subjective and inherently controversial. And I do find it exhausting. I've made no secret of that. I do find it so deeply uninteresting. I'd so much rather talk about footballers and coaches and almost anything else. But I accept that there comes a point where you have to talk about it because it's so prominent in people's minds and the way in which they're digesting games now. Yeah,
I've seen people talk about, whether or not it is deliberate as a way of generating engagement, and the media landscape in which football exists now demands that kind of thing, right?
I think it's totally deliberate.
Yeah. But I think as well, what you said earlier, about the media needing to take some responsibility, I think is absolutely right. The sort of platforming of the legendary Howard Webb on Sky's Overlap podcast, right? That framing of him as some kind of central character to football is really bad. I think it's really bad. He's got a job, and his job is to ensure that refereeing and officiating standards are as high as they can possibly be. Not to be the legendary sort of arch villain celebrity ref guy in the, as you say, the soap opera of the Premier League. And it baffles me that nobody with any interest in maintaining, I don't want to say the integrity of the game, but in what people love about the game is not referees and referee decisions and VAR. And people love to argue, people love to debate, people love to discuss, of course. And these things provide those opportunities, but not in a positive way, right? And you're not really talking about the game. You're talking about what an official did or what a guy in a video room did, right?
Yeah.
And I'm staggered that nobody who really loves football has thought to say, is this a good idea? Is it a good idea to sort of be all matey, backslappy with Howard Webb and give him this platform to sort of continue his how do I put this properly? It's sort of dissembling, really, in that he's able to put across his own view of things that don't really tally with what many of us have seen in real life. Pick and choose these moments where I can show that my referees and my officials have done great things and made the right decisions. And then they'll do something like, but yes, of course, in that situation, a different decision might have been made. And they move on. And it's sort of like this tiny little crumb that they give you to say, yes, we're aware that we made a mistake, but we're not really going to own that mistake. Instead, we're going to trumpet all the things that we are doing right. It's sort of like they're basically like a government spokesperson telling you, well, we've done all this amazing stuff, and you're saying, well, there's no hospitals anymore and everyone's dying. Yeah, but it's just bullshit. It's all bullshit.
It is, yeah. I on the one hand, I understand that people want PGMOL to have some sort of presence. There's always calls for accountability. When are they going to explain decisions? When they don't say anything, that's a problem as well for a lot of people. So I can see how they've arrived at the decision that they have to be more front-footed and more vocal. But I do think it is basically a waste of time. I mean, it is Howard Webb's media appearances basically constitute him justifying every decision that is made and sort of batting away criticism, which I don't think moves anything forward.
There's a difference between transparency and propaganda.
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. But yeah, it's tricky because I say media have responsibility. They do on that front. But say a game like this Bournemouth game, for example. Unfortunately, the sending off is probably the most interesting or the most important aspect of that game to be analysed. Like, I can forgive Sky for spending 15 minutes half time. It's not even a full 15 minutes, really. You've got about 3 ad breaks in there. But whatever it is, talking about the sending off, because...
Well, nothing else happened.
A, nothing else happened, and B, it is absolutely pivotal. I think that's something that we sort of have to accept, that I don't think there's a version of football where referees aren't going to be important, because it's too low scoring a game. Like they're always going to have a big say in it. And the calls that they make are often going to be decisive, certainly the major calls. So in a way, it's completely unavoidable. And when the calls go against us, inevitably we're going to feel frustrated about that. And I do think that has sort of been the flavour of the first part of this season, that we have been on the wrong end of calls that don't feel consistently applied or particularly fair. And that is, I can understand people's grievances about that for sure.
I think if you were to take the temperature of this discussion across, let's say, fans of all the Premier League clubs, and in as much as possible you ask people to leave their inherent biases or frustrations with things to one side and said, look, what do you think of the way games are being officiated, about coverage of these decisions? I think there would be a fairly significant percentage of people who would be on the same page as we are on this, regardless of what's gone your way and what hasn't gone your way. Is there, like, has the presence of Howard Webb, has the attempt at transparency worked, or has it simply undermined even further the faith that people have in officials? And I would say probably the latter.
The problem is, I think it's impossible, isn't it, to be truly transparent? I mean, if as PGMOL, MOL, whatever they're called, you come out and you're like, yeah, this referee, Dave Smith, like, massively fucked up. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's very difficult that's very difficult for them to do and maintain that referee's authority.
Sure, but some would argue that level of scrutiny or that level of accountability could go some way to raising standards. There would be the counter argument to that.
It would.
Like, you don't expect them to, like, throw them under the bus and say, well, Dave Smith got that completely wrong, what an idiot. But, I think, like in any job, as we've said before, and I don't think it is like any job really, but, there are standards that are expected. And if you fall below those standards, then there's an impact on your employment situation, for everybody in the world. But
that's true. But there have to be the people there to
take over and
take over and be better.
But then we'll get the other people telling us, oh, you shouldn't be mean to referees because it's so hard for referees. And, the sort of other sections of the media sometimes that gatekeep any criticism or scrutiny on referees. So
sure, I'm part of the conspiracy, Andrew. I'm often told, but I do feel like it is all a consequence. Not all. It's largely a consequence of kind of the way football discourse has evolved and a move to greater subjectivity. The explosion of social media. I'm not sure refereeing standards are dramatically worse than they have ever been in this country. I think that the way we analyse, dissect, and debate those moments is what has shifted most. And that is why every Monday, we're talking about referees. And I'm not convinced that 20 or 30 years ago, that would be quite the same.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I'm not sure. It's a pain, though.
Yeah,
it's a real pain.
It is.
And I don't think. I mean, I'm on record with what I think the solution to this is. I think that they should hire in the best referees in the world, and use some of the vast wealth at the Premier League's disposal to bring in the single best people to do these jobs, as the clubs do when it comes to their playing staff. I think that is absolutely the right way to go, to make it an international pursuit, to make the Premier League the league that every referee in the world aspires to be in. Why? Because you get the most exposure and you make the most money. And it does the most for your career prospects internationally. And, you know, when it comes to refereeing World Cups and the like, I think that's what should be done. But yeah.
Don't tell the Daily Mail, though. They'll be like, English football has got to be refereed by English referees.
Yeah, of course, because it's always played by English players.
Famously. Yeah, exactly. All right. Do you have a question?
Let's have a look. Okay, what about this from Johnny Bow, who said, "Morning, chaps. How much of a must-win is Liverpool on Sunday? With City getting yet again what feels like a plum fixture with Southampton at home and Liverpool going in already 4 points ahead, could we madly find ourselves too far adrift already if we draw or worse lose on Sunday?"
Yeah, it does feel very much like a must-win game, doesn't it? You know, you have to respond when you lose. And I think what part of the progression of this team has been the ability to respond more quickly than it did in the past.
Yeah.
And I think we need to see that on Sunday against Liverpool. Is it a must-win? I mean, look, I haven't looked at the table. Do I want to look at the table? Do I want to look at the Premier League table?
I don't know if it's that time. I mean, let's have a look. Yeah.
Let's have a look. I mean, we're in third and we're 3 points behind Liverpool, or 3 points behind Manchester City and 4 points behind Liverpool. So is it a must-win? I mean, I think it would be a very, very important win for sure.
So
I think every game is kind of a must-win, you know, but yeah, in the context of a title race, I think yes.
I think yes, actually. So I'm sorry to freak everyone out by sort of being so definitive about that.
Yeah.
But I just look at that and I think I don't give Southampton a hope in hell against Manchester City. Obviously, in saying that, I'm hoping I'm achieving some sort of ultimate jinx, but we'll see. We could be 6 off City and 7 off Liverpool. That is not insignificant.
No. And there's a long way to go, but it's not ideal by any means.
No. And sort of awkwardly, this is kind of the period of the season where you'd hope City would still be kind of floundering without Rodri and figuring things out. And you might expect them to drop a couple of points here and there. So
there's not much floundering going on by Liverpool or Man City.
No. I think... Yeah. Sounds absurd, doesn't it? Having only lost one game out of the first 8 and had some really difficult fixtures in there, through which we came pretty unscathed. And maybe we're being too reactive, and maybe there's, you know, a much kinder run of fixtures to come, and we will make up some ground. But if you're asking me today on how I feel,
sure,
I feel if we are to win the league, we probably need to win that game on Sunday.
It feels like a moment where we can kind of make a statement about our season, in a way, you know, because, look, again, we all have seen and witnessed and experienced and lived through the opening part of this season and the various challenges that we have had for all kinds of reasons, whether it's injuries or red cards and all that kind of stuff, right? But I think there is a sense maybe that we have been a little less convincing than people might have liked. Mm-hmm. Whereas I think if you go and you beat Liverpool next weekend, it sort of lights a fire, you know, and gets people to take you a bit more seriously than I've seen some people take Arsenal this weekend. Some of the commentary from, you know, outlets which I would have expected a little bit better has been quite critical of Arsenal and critical of you know, our quality and our potential. So I think it is important, not just for the 3 points, but to sort of say, hey, wait a minute, you know, don't write us off by any means. So I think it is a big day. Obviously, no William Saliba for that. So we had a couple of questions about that. Matt Treadwell on the Discord. What do we do at the back against Liverpool without Big Willie? And George Stevens 11. What's your starting back four for Liverpool, assuming Zinchenko and Timber are both fit and available?
Is that a reasonable assumption on Timber? I don't know.
I don't know. Timber could return on Tuesday. I've just seen a news article. So from the press conference, no Saka, no Odegaard, but Saka and Timber could return on Tuesday. So if Timber's available tomorrow and, comes through that game unscathed, then he's, going to be available for Sunday.
Yeah. Okay. I will... what would I go with for my back four? I think I would go with Ben White at centre-half.
Interesting.
Yeah. I think I would. I think if Timber's fit, I'd reinstate a Ben White-Gabriel partnership for the first time in God knows how long. But it was a very good partnership once upon a time.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd keep Calafiori at left-back and play Timber at right-back. That would be my choice. What would you do?
I think that's what I would do as well, but I could be wrong here, but I think during the summer there were a couple of moments where it was Ben White at right back and Timber at centre half.
Yeah, though.
Am I right about that?
I don't know if Ben White was with us. Oh, he was, yeah, because he didn't go to the Euros. Yeah, there were certainly games where Timber played at centre back in pre-season. I remember that. He played really well in a couple of games there. And we sort of discussed at the time whether it was something he was considering doing more of, or whether it was a way of sort of managing his distances covered rather than right back as he returned from injury. He played a lot of football at centre back for Ajax.
Yeah.
And he is good there.
I think, though, I'd be with you in that I'd play Ben White at centre half, and I think what Timber could offer on the right-hand side in attack, we know Liverpool are very strong coming forward, and they've got a lot of quality, and I think he's a very dogged defender and a very good defender as well. But if I'm thinking of ways to hurt Liverpool, it is getting at their back four, and I think we've seen in a couple of games this season, Timber, what he offers in the final third is really, really exciting. So maybe if you want to be that secure, you can play White and Gabriel at centre half, because they played together before. They know each other quite well. I think they're quite well suited. And Timber at right back, and like you, I keep Calafiori at left back as well. Yeah,
I think those are the best four players we can put out there, and I think that's probably the best deployment of them. But it's going to be tough. We're without William Saliba. I think there's a very good case for him to be our best defender. Without Martin Odegaard, our captain, maybe our best midfield player. Bukayo Saka, I think, will be a bit of a doubt. And if it was up to me, I'd take Saka out of Shakhtar if I thought it gave him a better chance for Sunday.
100%. 100%.
Sterling came off after half an hour. He can play against Shakhtar. If you want to have Saka on the bench, maybe, but we need him on Sunday.
Yeah, big time. I wouldn't take any risk at all with Saka tomorrow night against Shakhtar. Like, if we need him, if we're, in the final half hour of the game and we need goals, then, I understand, but I'm not sure I would start him. If there is a risk that he, could miss Liverpool, I think it's really, really important that we have him for Liverpool. And, if we're talking about Nwaneri starting against Shakhtar, there's no reason why either Sterling or Jesus, can't do the job against that team.
Absolutely. Here's a question from Ro, who says, "Hello, gents. Biggest takeaway from our game was that two poor errors led to both Bournemouth goals. Not officiating errors, although this could be and has been hotly debated, but rather errors in poor back passes. Both were rather careless. Does Arteta stew over this and drop Trossard and deny Kivior a start next weekend? No doubt he'll be hammering home the point of controlling the game at every opportunity and aspect of the game. Have a great day. Ciao for now." I mean, what do you make of that, the sloppiness of those errors, and how does Arteta deal with that?
I mean, do you need to tell either of those players they made a big mistake? I don't think so.
I doubt it.
Kivior looked absolutely gutted. I mean, I think he was fine when he came on. He wasn't really, like we were talking about in the first half, it wasn't as if we were under the cosh. And I think he was just having a perfectly cromulent performance until he made that mistake. The ball bounced up. He didn't make the right contact. I watched it again. It sort of came off his heel rather than his foot, which left the pass undercooked. And of course, he had the thing of being a substitute who got substituted, which is...
Yes. Was that... Did you feel that was
I don't think it was... No. I think it was just about getting another player onto the pitch who could potentially score as a goal, and therefore you have to sacrifice a defender. So how do you find your balance?
It probably didn't feel great, though.
I think he... Yeah, I'm sure he had a horrible Saturday night, you know? Yeah. So I don't think he needs to sort of, send him down the salt mines or anything like that. He knows... And human error is part and parcel of football. And I think one of the things Arteta is quite good at is, when these individual errors happen, he never really criticises the player, He always talks about how these things can happen in football. It's part of the game. He doesn't stick the knife in, at least not publicly. And I don't think he needs, what does he need to say to Kivior in that circumstance? Other than, you should have done better there. And Kivior's, yeah, I know. Yeah. But was Kivior going to play anyway against Liverpool? Barring an injury crisis, I don't think so. Trossard, I think, is an interesting one because people go back and forth on Trossard as a starter, don't they?
Yeah, definitely.
This sort of debate about whether we see the best of him as a substitute or whether we see the best of him, when he's in form in starting games. I understood why he started the other day because Martinelli had come back from international duty with a bit of an injury. So Trossard is the obvious guy to play on the left if you're not going to play Gabriel Jesus, and he's been in good form this season. I don't know. What's the question again? What's he supposed to do with these players?
Yeah, are there consequences in terms of selection? For those two in particular, like Trossard, I think you're right on Kivior. I don't foresee Kivior playing against Liverpool regardless, unless there's a couple more injuries. But should Trossard pay a price for what he did?
It's very careless from an experienced player, and it's cost us in a big way. And like you said, not just in the game we played on Saturday, but for the game we've got to play next Sunday, Yeah. Is it a punishment of Trossard if Martinelli starts against Shakhtar? Or Gabriel Jesus starts against Shakhtar and Trossard is a sub?
I think there's a very good chance that happens anyway.
Yeah.
Right?
So is it like a punishment? Right, you did this, therefore you're going to sit on the bench for the next game. I'm not really sure that's quite how it works, Should it? I don't know.
I think... I don't know. Honestly, I've watched that incident several times. I've got no idea what Trossard's doing. And because of that, I almost think you have to write it off. If he was doing it every week.
That's it. It's repetition of mistakes or errors. If that's what you're seeing, then I think you're perfectly entitled to say to a player, until you stop doing that shit, you're not going to play.
Yeah.
And it's even then
a pretty freakish incident.
Yeah, even then it's not always easy. We've had experiences of players who make the same kinds of mistakes over and over again, but because of the nature of the squad or the makeup of the squad, you've got no choice but to pick them.
Yeah.
And that's the unfortunate part of it. But I do think you're right. It is a case that, it's just a freaky, weird thing he did. I don't know what was going through his head. And yeah, I'm sure he held his hands up afterwards and said sorry. But I don't think it's necessarily beneficial to then haul him over the coals, in a really obvious way. If he doesn't start the next game, it could be just because we want to play Martinelli on the left-hand side in a game where we might get a lot of space. It's not related. The two things aren't necessarily related,
No, I'm with you.
I'm just trying to think here. I had a question about... A couple of people had asked this sort of question, but it's quite heavy.
Okay.
And I don't...
I'm ready. I'm braced.
Oh, you're ready. Okay. On the Discord, Chloak Dagger says, how does a defeat like yesterday compare to a defeat from 5 years ago? I'm trying to decide if I feel better knowing generally how good things are with the club, or worse, knowing how much every point seems to matter. And there was a similar one from Rusty Stove 93, not to sound dour, but as competing with City for the title started to take the joy out of games like this, result aside, I find myself much less celebratory when winning games we should win, and more relieved we just didn't drop points. And on occasions like this in Fulham last year, I find myself even more upset. It feels like the whole season is in jeopardy. Obviously, it's much better to be where we are now versus 3 years ago, but in a weird way, football seems to be a little more joyless, and I wouldn't be surprised if the players feel the same way.
Yeah, shout out Dylan as well, who said, how do we as fans stop getting into the existential dread that a single loss can have? How did Liverpool fans not go completely manic? I mean,
maybe they did.
They did, to answer your question there, Dylan. I've spoken to many Liverpool fans about this phenomenon of competing with Man City and the kind of nerve-shredding aspect of it, where every missed chance, every dropped point feels enormous, right? And look, we're in October and we're talking about potentially season-defining game against Liverpool next weekend, right? So we've all succumbed to it. I think that it's definitely better. Like, if you compare this to 5 years ago, part of the reason your nerves are shredded and you care is the degree of investment you've built in the project and the team and the club, and the fact that there is a chance of winning something. You know, ultimately, no one's ever going to shed that many tears over finishing 6th or 7th, you know? But 1st or 2nd is everything. And I think it's inevitable. And I think it's what you want. That's the exhilaration of sport and having the chance of winning something, is that, you know, there are two sides to that coin, and glory and pain are decided by the finest margins. I don't know. Is that how you see it?
I understand where people are coming from on this.
Yeah. I have one theory, by the way, that's a little bit controversial.
Okay. What a good way to sort of close out a podcast. Yeah. Get people thinking and raging.
I was thinking about this over the weekend as I stewed slightly in defeat. And I do think that we have a manager and a team that is so much built around winning. I do think that it's kind of a win at all costs. And I think winning and exploiting margins is kind of the overriding philosophy of Mikel Arteta's Arsenal right now. Like, that is sort of what we have become. Like a machine that is set up for efficiency. And I think when that doesn't work, I think that that's a little bit... I don't think you necessarily have like great kind of... how can I phrase this? I think in the past, let's say like the Wenger years, which many of us are kind of formed by or grew up on, I think when it didn't go for you, there was sort of always the satisfaction of kind of being able to, you know, sit back in your armchair, puff on your pipe and win the philosophical argument. And I don't necessarily think that this team is that way. I think we're so fine-tuned for efficiency that when you don't win, I'm not sure there's the same kind of pride in performance that sort of like sustains you.
Sure.
That's quite a controversial viewpoint, though. But I think others would argue that.
I think I know where you're coming from. It's like the way we want to play the game and the principles with which we play the game. It all depends. You know, people will think, well, pragmatism and efficiency are the things you need to be ruthless winners. And everyone wants Arsenal to be ruthless winners. Yeah. But at the same time, there are others who might think, well, the style with which you try and play football is important. That feels, I can connect with it a little bit, but style over substance is not really a good thing.
Absolutely. You know? But I suppose where I'm coming from is like, if your identity becomes that you're ruthless winners, when you don't win, it feels pretty hollow. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Now we do win most of the time, but I think there was a time where I thought that Mikel Arteta's Arsenal would have more of an aspiration of kind of a sort of more aesthetic aspiration than it currently seems to. That is my opinion, but
yeah, I know
it
what
works
you mean.
though, so I'm not arguing.
No, I know what you mean. Like maybe there's not quite as much Barcelona in the DNA as there is, you know, or than you might have thought. You know,
yeah, I wouldn't go down the Spanish Moyes route. You know,
no. I know
terrorist ball.
No, I mean, I think
I wouldn't go that far. And you know, we're speaking in the wake of a defeat on Saturday where we were missing possibly our two best attacking players, right? So we have to keep all things in context. But I do think that when what was kind of exciting for me about a couple of years ago when we were going up against City was that we were kind of the anti-City. Like we were this sort of snowballing team full of potential and promise that were kind of unexpected. And that's really captivating and really exciting and enthralling. And I think in order to get closer to City, we have kind of absorbed some of the qualities of City in the way we play. And we no longer feel, to me, like an antithesis. We feel like an emulation.
Facsimile in a way.
Yeah, exactly.
I know what you mean. I think there is... Here's what I would say. I think where we are as a football club and as a football team is fantastic. Right?
Oh,
to have made that goes without saying, right? But I do feel like within the structures and the organization that Mikel Arteta has created that has been so effective and has got us to this point where we're feeling, our first defeat of the season, our first away defeat since 2023. I know it was December 31st, 2023, but you know, first time we've lost a game away from home in 10 months or 11 months. There is this sort of introspection, and that's because standards have been raised and expectations have been raised. What I would say is I feel like there might just be room for a bit more, I don't want to say flair, because that sort of makes it sound like a frippery or something, you know? I think you can add a little more creativity, a little more dynamism, a little more attacking verve, whilst also maintaining the efficiency and the ruthlessness and the organization and the discipline and all those kinds of things. I think there is room for that within this team. And I'm reminded of something you said about Bukayo Saka a couple of weeks ago, where he is this incredibly efficient end product machine, whether it's goals or assists. But is he considered like a particularly flair player? I don't think so. You said there's like just an efficiency to the way Bukayo Saka influences games. There's a relentless, high-level quality to what he does that results in goals and assists. But I don't think he's necessarily considered, let's say, the most skillful player around or anything like that. And maybe that is a sort of a mirror of, you know, what you're talking about here. Yeah,
and he's been honed, you know, by a manager into that player. I was thinking about this actually during the Bournemouth game as well. Like Mikel Merino may well turn out to be absolutely brilliant for us, and he is clearly a very good player. And I think even on Saturday, although he had a good chance in the first half that we didn't mention, he might have taken a shot wide of the near post. He might have ended with an assist as well, having set up Gabriel Martinelli. But I do think that signing is interesting in terms of what it tells us about the manager. Because like, if I mean, thank God I'm not, but if I had been the Arsenal manager, looking at signing a number 8 in the summer, having lost Emile Smith-Rowe and with Fabio Vieira going out, it probably would have been quite a different profile of number 8.
Sure.
And I think that there's something sort of instructive about that signing that tells us how Arteta envisions the team moving forward. Now, if Ethan Nwaneri plays on tomorrow night and has a good game, this conversation might all be tomorrow's podcast paper.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I do wonder if there is something in that. But also, I'm sure we might also reflect on this and think this is too much introspection, really.
Could be for one defeat. Yeah, no, I get it. But I think is it not a consequence of not just one defeat, but like everything, the progress that we've made over the last couple of years, and how you have to try and cope or deal with disappointment and setback. It's different now than it was 2-3 years ago. There's no question about that.
Totally, yeah.
Everyone has to find their own way, I think.
It is, and to come back to the question about Liverpool fans, I mean, they went through the ringer and they found it hellish. I think if you speak to any Liverpool fan, you'll find you have a lot of common ground with them, actually, about what it's like to be embroiled in a race with Man City. And who knows? Look, Liverpool look like they're going to be there this season. They look like they're going to be in and around it. They had a good result against Chelsea at the weekend. Salah's in good form. So, yeah, maybe we'll both be experiencing that particular roller coaster over the course of this season. All right. Well, look, I think that's as good a place as any to leave it. You can join myself and Phil over on Patreon. A little bit later on, we'll be looking back at all the weekend's Premier League action. I actually don't really feel like doing that, to be honest. Yeah, like I said, it wasn't great for us in terms of results. It wasn't great. And look, it wasn't a brilliant weekend. So we'll try and find an interesting way or an entertaining way to deal with the weekend's Premier League action over on Patreon in the 30. We might even tack on a little bit of a Shakhtar preview onto the end of that as well. So patreon.com/Arseblog. For now, though, thank you so much as always for being with us. Hope you enjoyed the show, and we will catch you on the next one. Bye-bye.